Hello, good afternoon. My name is Kelly Maldonado. I'm a master's level social worker and a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also a doctoral candidate right now in a DSW program. So I'm very excited to be here and chat with you all today. Your professor invited me, and I'm excited to share a little bit about my viewpoints and experience on human rights as it relates to homelessness and housing. So I wanted to share a little bit about myself, my positionality, and just kind of walk you through a little bit some of the components that I think are, really important for us to have a framework around as it relates to homelessness, and tell you about something that I've been working on as well for my capstone as it relates to homelessness. So like I said, I'm a social worker, right? I have about 10 years experience working in the field with individuals experiencing homelessness, mental health issues, um, substance abuse issues, um, and have really worked in being able to connect individuals to services. I've worked in different roles such as case management, connecting individuals to court, mental health services, rehabs, um, vouchers, right? Housing vouchers, moving from individuals from being on the street to permanent housing. I've also worked in supervisory positions, research, and most recently, my hat is a therapist, right? But I will always be a boots on the ground advocate. And so, for my doctorate, I get to continue to pursue that. And so that's really my passion is shelter. Housing is a human right. Everybody being able to have housing and affordable housing at that. And that's something that I've been writing about since my master's, so for about 10 years now. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, human rights and social work. So, believe it or not, the US has yet to declare a federal law for the right to shelter. So, what that means is that currently the Supreme Court has not yet deemed housing as a constitutional right. So, the United States views housing as a commodity, as property, and not as something that we should all have. Right, and this goes directly against the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, right, which is there to ensure and protect the human rights for all globally. And although we see that this right is enshrined in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, we still see that the US has not ratified this treaty, right? And so, therefore, it continues to not be a federal law. And so, how do social workers, right, play a role in all of this? And the way that we can kind of, look at this from the framework would be rights-based social work, right? And that can be something that we can use in response to how we move through the housing crisis, on how we examine social problems, and how we move towards developing solutions, how we move towards being able to partner with people, to connect with them on their experiences, to stand with them in solidarity. So that's really at the foundation, right, of our core values as well as social workers. And this is something that a lot of people might not think about, right? And so we need our social workers to stand for those that are homeless. If we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's one of those things where, yeah, duh, we should all have it. We should all have housing, just like we should all have food, right? And water and clothes on our backs. And so it can be hard for people to conceptualize that that's not something that we all have. And that unfortunately it's not looked at as a right, but anyone that has humanity in them, right, would see that as the opposite. Okay. So, what is the problem? What's going on? Um, so, essentially, when people with lived experiences, right, of homelessness are not included in the discussions around homelessness, when they're not regarded in that way, we see gaps occur, right? And so the concept is to be able to allow the individuals that are experiencing this to take stock in what's happening and be able to be a part of policy decisions. Unfortunately, when we ignore these lived experiences, gaps begin to occur, right? And then we're not using the approach that might be the most beneficial in service delivery. And so the concept of lived experience is just that, right? Someone that has experienced this and is now able to move forward and share from their own viewpoint how their experience has impacted them, right? And what we can do about it, right? So even if we break this down and kind of imagine, we go to a restaurant, we're at a restaurant, we get the food, we eat. Was it good? Was it bad? Right? How was the temperature in the restaurant? Oh man, it was really hot. It was really stuffy. It was uncomfortable. Oh, it was really expensive, right? So we're consumers, right? And we have this judgment or perception on how things are. And so maybe that restaurant owner has you write a review or write a feedback, or the manager comes up, how are things going, right? And so it's important for them to hear that lived experience of the patron at the restaurant saying, hey, this really isn't working out. You have us sitting right at the heater and it's blasting, or hey, it took 10 minutes for the server to even come over and acknowledge us, right? So those are problems and then solutions, right? Is there something that we can do? Can we move this table away from the heater? Can we get the service to come out within the first 5 minutes that someone's there? Right. And so that's kind of the approach that I'm kind of talking about, right? If we really start to kind of break it down. Um, so, kind of shifting back, right, to the problem statement, if we don't have individuals, a part of this and being a part of a solution focused process in addressing homelessness, um, we're not going to have those lessons, right? So we're going to have people in positions that have no idea maybe what's really going on in that, experience making the decisions for people. So, there's actually literature that's kind of demonstrating that without the ability to have those lived experiences, how are we going to eradicate homelessness? Right? And despite the unique insights that people experiencing homelessness can offer on their situations, their voices often remain excluded from research and policy. We're beginning to see a shift in this where it's starting to grow in recognition and more researchers are using this lens. And so, therefore, that's why this is important. And that's why social workers should be aware of this so that they can integrate this into their work. So, what is the purpose of all of this? Why would we move through this lived experience lens and advocating for human rights, right? So, currently there's 770,000 individuals experiencing homelessness in the United States, and each one of those individuals has a story to share. The National Coalition, as I mentioned before, right, stands with the principle and mission that the only way to truly eradicate homelessness is going to be with the expertise and leadership of those that have been impacted the most by their experiences of homelessness. Right, so right now we currently don't see many organizations or agencies being represented by the community of people that they work with. And so allowing individuals to be in that space is going to be really rewarding. Um, and so that is the reason. That's why we're doing this, right? There's that connection right there already from the very beginning that someone can connect to someone based on their experience. Theoretical framework. So we're looking at this from a framework of conflict theory, right? So we're thinking about Karl Marx. We're thinking of the haves and the have-nots in society. And we're utilizing this understanding, right, to kind of look at the positionality of the people in these experiences, a lived experience of homelessness, right? And then the opposite, right? Maybe the people in power, the people that make the decisions, that write the policies. And then also looking at ourselves. What's our position on this? How are social workers human rights defenders? And how are we also violators? Right. And so it's important for us to kind of look at our own positionality in this as well, and being able to challenge those relationships between the different power structures and the effects that it has, right, on society. So by using a rights based lens, right, along with the principles of conflict theory, we can begin to try to promote more equity and social justice, right? By us as social workers using our different lenses, right? We're in micro spaces, we're in macro spaces. We're able to really begin to address people's immediate needs while also being able to make sure that we are challenging, right, our own privilege, that we're um, providing and insisting on fair distribution of privilege, power, assets in society. Um, and so that's where we kind of get the concept of shared governance, right? So bringing in someone that has this experience of homelessness into these spaces, right, with maybe people that might have more power, right? And so being able to say, hey, we're sharing this space, we're sharing this in terms of the ultimate goal, right? And whether that goal is to reduce homelessness, right? So being able to look at that, right? And within our own selves, the power that we might have and how, are we really breaking that down in a way that we're really truly meeting people where they're at? We're not judging people, and we're really checking our own biases at the door, right? Checking our own judgments as well. So then we kind of come into the concept of ethics, right? So our own ethics and values as social workers, right? So many of you may be, aware of NASW or IFSW, right? And so there's a quote here from IFSW. The role of social workers in social protection systems is to facilitate community solidarity and engage in the development of systems that will be inclusive for all people and treat them with dignity and respect and ensuring human rights and social justice. Yeah, right. That makes me proud to be a social worker, and I hope it makes you proud to be one too. Right? That's what it's rooted in: dignity, respect, humanity, justice, right? So by us having a rights-based approach to housing and lived experience, right, and having this shared governance, it's really vital. It's vital to overcoming housing crises and challenges, and really any aspect of our work, right? Are we joining in with our the individuals that we're serving? Right? And so the core of the lived experience governance is the centering self, right? Is it's centering self, it's centering people, identity, and human rights. At the root of this methodology, we can observe its conceptual framework and roots, right? And again, that's aligning with our rights-based social work and our practice, right? And those ethical responsibilities that we have, those the code of ethics, and social workers should be encouraged, right, to take social and political action that seeks to ensure that all people have equal access to resources, employment, services, and opportunities that they require to meet their basic human needs and to develop fully. right? So our as social workers, right, being able to stand up to this code and say, hey, we're a part of this. We are a part of advocating for standing up for justice and human rights and lived experiences. We may even be involved in policy spaces, right, where we're writing bills, we're moving towards that. Okay. So that brings us right into other spaces that social workers can be involved in, right? So we kind of left off talking a little bit about policy and how they might be involved there. And so there is a grand challenge for social work program out of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare that has been leading a call to action on the grand challenges that require our attention as social workers. And one of them is the grand challenge of um, housing, right? And the social justice behind that. Structural factors that contribute to this problem include poverty, income inequality, and disparities in distribution and resources, right? So even looking at the structural factors that continue to promote the challenges of homelessness, right? We're looking at poverty, income inequality. There's so many barriers to housing. Policy changes needed to be able to improve access to affordable housing, right? So some things that could be changed could be raising minimum wage, raising disability benefits, and all of the ways in which social workers can collaboratively work across different disciplines, right? So we are in so many spaces. I mean, this is such an amazing profession to be in, right? We get to wear so many hats. We can wear a researcher hat, clinical services, right? Therapy, case management services, social policy, right? Macro leveled social workers. We're in so many spaces, nursing homes, hospitals, um, right? And so we're able to move across and address so many systemic issues surrounding so many issues, right? Even other than homelessness. Um, so just remembering that, right, that you're needed so much as a social worker in so many aspects, and if you intend on pursuing, right, like the human right of shelter and housing, there's so much work for you to do. Um, it is a grand scale um, issue, right, and it takes innovation. It takes um, collaboration, right, with many systems to be able to move through. So I'm going to break down a little bit about the study that I have kind of been working on as it relates to lived experience. So a little bit of some research stuff here for you, throwing this in a little bit. So this was a qualitative study. And what I did is I held a focus group. It was semi structured, so I had a few questions that I had for the people that I was in the focus group with, right? And so the individuals that were in the group were folks that were currently homeless or at risk of homelessness or had a past history of homelessness. And so my questions were geared towards my target audience, which was social workers and politicians, right? So I wanted to know, what are we doing right? What are social workers doing right? How has our involvement been helpful? How have we promoted human rights? How have we not been so great? Right? Like thinking back on that restaurant, how is this a good experience and how is this not a good experience, right? Because as hard as it is to get some feedback sometimes, it's so needed, right? And so when we're able to put our guard down with that and just be like, yeah, give it to me, constructive criticism can be so positive because from that we can learn to become better social workers, which is at the root. And so that's what I wanted to know, right? What are we doing good? What are we doing that's not so good? How can we do better? What do you think are some barriers that you've seen to homelessness? And what do you think are solutions? What are recommendations? What would you say to politicians about these barriers? Right. And so, my research question in particular was, what persons of lived experience recommend to social workers and policymakers about problems and solutions to homelessness? And this research was informed by a social work, human rights based approach, and within there, I also had a case study, a literature review, and my findings from the focus group that I did with the advisory board group, right? So a group of individuals um, that, right, as mentioned in note one, right, had some experience with homelessness. So as I did this focus group, and came back to the office, transcribed it, analyzed it, I was able to see four major themes that came out from this. Right. So when you're doing a focus group, you want to look for themes. You want to look for collective commonality. Right. So what is the collective saying? Right. Not just one person, but like, hey, many people are saying this. Right. So then we start to say, what else is there? There's got to, something's going on with that, right? Maybe we're on to something here. So the first note was that these individuals, they were really standing together, and they had a lot of solidarity, a lot of self-determination, motivation, just amazing, amazing human beings. And their idea was, we got to pay it forward. We when we were on the streets, we're sharing stories with the next person that unfortunately is coming onto the streets. How are we surviving? These are the need to knows. This is what you need to know. This is what you need to do. This is where you can go eat. This is, the different services that might help. And from that, individuals are able to build a sense of confidence and move through homelessness, right? As they help themselves and as they share and help others. And so from that, they shared wanting to be in other spaces that they can give back, whether this is social service agency, um, and different roles in the community where they can stand in solidarity, right? Because there's something to say about someone that's been in that position, right? So if they're seeing someone that's currently homeless on the street and this person knows them, they say, oh, I've seen them before, they used to be homeless too, and what are they doing? um, Now they're not homeless, right? It opens up this door where that person now feels um, comfortable with them. There's a commonality, right? And so that's another great reason why lived experience is so important. Okay, let's move on to good and bad social workers, right? So this is a quote from one of the participants. A positive trait is a case in a caseworker is someone that doesn't make you feel like another number. Simple, very simple, right? And from that, I hear humanity, meeting me where I'm at, giving me respect, dignity, treating me like a person. Just be a person, just be a human being, right? Not having an attitude, not speaking down on people, right? And so that was the common theme. Just be a good person. Just treat me like a person. Don't make me feel like I'm someone you have to work with, or oh man, here they come again, or oh, it's just another number, right? Because that's not the case. We're people. Another theme was damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? And that was looking at the barriers to housing. And so from that came forth the perpetual fear of losing their housing, right? So there's this all the barriers that you have getting into the housing, right? Being able to find it if you don't have income, or you're only on GA or TANF or Social Security, right? So you're overcoming all of that in a market that um, is very high, you know. And then these vouchers are not meeting the fair market value rates, right? So we're talking about people starting in poverty and then remaining in poverty, right? So there's that connection to the damned if you do, damned if you don't, where it's like, man, when can I get a break? Even after I get the housing, I'm still stressed, right? I'm still worried. Man, am I going to lose this? What do I do? And so that moves us into the next one, which was you don't want to go into the Roach Motel with drugs going out the back door, right? Man, does that quote just say it, right? Individuals are living in great poverty. They can't afford to be in places that are nice. And so, right, taking a look again at the voucher amounts, how much money people are getting in temporary rental assistance, and how it's below the fair market value. And so, what that means is, let's say you get $1,400, right? The government's giving you $1,400 to find a place to live, but all of the places are $1,700 or more. Can't find one for that. And if you do, yeah, you might feel lucky, but it's not going to be great. You might be have like a, one bedroom, share a bathroom, and then it's this concept, right, of the roaches motel, right, where there might be infestations of bugs, there might be high crime rates, drug activity, violence, right, and so people are moved into some of these areas, right, and these are all barriers, right. So these are the four common themes that came from my research. All right. And so from that, I looked at, okay, now we know all this. So what can we recommend? What can we do with this knowledge that we have? How do we disseminate this knowledge, right? As social workers, we always want to think about that. I know this, I learned this. Now what do I do with this knowledge? I have a responsibility. I have my ethics, right? And so, the advisory board members, right, they discuss, well, can we get into those spaces with the politicians to be more in that shared governance space where we are able to discuss these issues related to affordable housing? So that is a recommendation that came forth. Um, I thought this was a very productive meeting that I had with them. And had I been a politician, if I had the power, I would have signed off right there on that next bill. Excuse me. So just looking at that, right? Looking at, can we get them into those spaces? And knowing that there are advisory boards now up across the state and across the country. And so I do want to leave you with, that there is hope, right? There is hope in that people are doing this, that this is becoming the next leg, and that this is something you should get in on, right? Whether it's directly related to homelessness or something else, thinking about that lived experience, rights based social work approach. Um, and so, if we're thinking back, right, to those themes, damned if you do, damned if you don't, in the Roach Motel, right, how do we move forward with that, right? And people living in perpetual fear of where they currently are or that they're going to lose the little bit that they have, right? And so that's where we come into, can we increase what people are receiving? Right? And so I have a policy memo that I'm working on presenting to a politician on that. So looking at specifically what I was talking about earlier, right, where maybe this voucher, they give you 1,400, but you're not going to find a place for under 17. Can we raise it up $300 so that it meets that fair market value rate? Right? Can we get it closer? So we're not asking for much, right? It doesn't have to be, um, a mansion, right? But something that is habitable for human beings, right? That they can have their dignity, that they deserve to be in that place. Um, and so another recommendation, right, shifting along to the social work component of it, right, because that was an important piece of this study as well, right, the learnings that we can have for social workers. And so social workers and social service providers are to begin to incorporate individuals with lived experience more in their agency work, more in the community, more in outreaches, let them be a part of this, right? That is a very important piece of it, and they have said they want to be a part of it. There's of a lot that comes in with that, right? Like I can feel really good. Like you went through this period and now you're giving back. Um, and so the focus, right, in particular, was being involved in point in time annual surveys. So what that is, for anyone that doesn't know, is it's essentially a surveying census that happens once a year for the nation. So I did this for the state of New Jersey for many years. And so essentially, it's counting how many people are homeless on one single night. Typically, it's in January, right? One single night, usually the coldest night on the year. And so we're seeing how many people are experiencing homelessness on that night. So these individuals were a part of doing the annual survey and they really enjoyed it and they wanted to be in that space, right? And that's important because at these sort of events, sometimes it's an event, sometimes it's on the street where people are literally going up and doing surveys. Um, but it puts their face out there, right? And we're thinking about that solidarity piece again and that connection piece. Hey, I've seen you before. You were homeless too. Yeah, I was, and this is what you could do, or get connected with these people, or hey, do you have a social worker, right? And so again, why it's important to be in that space. So right, that theme had good and bad. So the bad, um, unfortunately, individuals did not have a great experience with the workers at the county buildings. Okay. And it's important to know that many of those workers may not be social workers. They might not have the values and ethics that we might. And so, part of the recommendation is to have some training for them that's rooted in advancing human rights, and improve the interactions, right? So it was very simple. What, that theme was, right? Treat us as human beings, right? Like, don't treat me as a number. So simple, right? Our interactions with people, treat people how you would want to be treated, right? We're not degrading people. Um, what happens is if people are just put off like that, they're not going to come back. And now they're not going to get connected to the resources because so and so was nasty to them and they would, they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to yell at this lady, and whatever, right? So that's creating more barriers. So even looking at that, can we have some just basic training on that? And then also looking at the continued implementation of the Grand Challenge Initiative, right, that we talked about earlier, from the American Academy of Social Work and Welfare on ending homelessness. So being able to look at those practice recommendations and continue to uphold that, right? And to have social workers in all areas, micro, meso, um, macro, right? Being able to extend across all of the ways in which we can be helpful and we can stand up and promote human rights. Okay. So, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to leave you guys with some discussion questions. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions on anything or if you're considering a career in working with individuals experiencing homelessness. I'm happy to, talk with you. Okay. So, I want you to just think about the first question is how can social workers promote the right to housing and help individuals experiencing homelessness, right? So we talked about that theme that came out, good and bad social workers, right? Simple. What does it take to be a good social worker? What does that mean to you? How do I do that? What does that look like? How does that lead me to promoting human rights? How does that make me a human rights defender? Okay. And then the second question that I want you to think about is very, just straightforward. What did you learn today? Could be anything that I talked about. What is something new that you learned, And with that knowledge, how can you implement it, right? And that could be hypothetical. If you were a social worker in one of these spaces right now, and you have this knowledge, how would you disseminate it? What would you do? How would you implement this learning? Okay, so feel free to jot that down, and I look forward to seeing it. It has been a pleasure spending time with you, and sharing space with you virtually. All right, take care. Bye bye.